All right. Okay, so my name is Britta Crisp. I am the resident programs coordinator at Brookdale Middleton Stonefield, which is a memory care in Middleton on Stonefield. So I'm also a longtime member of this church. My family's journey with dementia began with my grandfather. How many years ago would that have been? 15. Following a surgery, he had a stroke, which didn't immediately turn into dementia, but as time progressed, it did become apparent that he was slipping. So life is funny. I grew up right next door to a memory care. In fact, when my family moved in there when I was a year old, he, driving past, he looked out the window and he said, "You're going to put me there one of these days." Well, sure enough. And it turned out to be the perfect situation because I was right next door. My mom was right next door. My brother was right next door, and we could bring the dog in every day and see him. So for a while, I was focused on just my grandfather and spending all the time I could with him. But then I got to know everyone else there. And then the program's coordinator at the time said, "Have you ever thought of this as a career?" And I hadn't, but thankfully she said that because I've never looked back. So in my role, I am in charge of planning and executing everyone's daily activities. I'm in charge of the calendar. I am a behavioral and emotional resource for all of my 32 residents and a primary liaison with their families. So I wear a lot of hats. I'm also in charge of memory care training. That is to say, the training focusing specifically on how to take care of a person with dementia, both taking care of the dementia and the person behind it. So let's jump right into it. What is dementia? Well, a lot of people think that there's Alzheimer's and there's dementia, or that Alzheimer's is the only kind of dementia. Alzheimer's, Lewy body, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, alcohol dementia, those are all to dementia what a cold, a flu, smallpox is to a fever, right? Dementia is the physiological condition, and those diseases are what causes it. Although in practice, those diseases are often treated very much the same from a behavioral aspect. Have people here heard of any of those ones that I mentioned? Yeah, we're familiar with those terms. I'll go over them briefly because our focus today is not the medical ins and outs of each of those dementias, but rather how we treat the people behind them, right? It's not as important to know what disease a person has as what person the disease has, right? But, right? It definitely changes the care philosophy thinking of it that way. But to go over quickly, Alzheimer's is the one we're all most familiar with, I think. That accounts for something like 60% of all cases of dementia. And I would tell you very simply what it is, but quite truthfully, we don't entirely understand what it is. Many of us have probably heard the plaques and tangles thing, right? The buildup of protein tangles and plaques in the brain. In the space between the neurons. That does seem to characterize the disease, but now there's studies debating whether that's really just a symptom or whether that's entirely exclusive to that at all. The point is, we don't entirely know yet, but wonderfully, there are finally some advances happening in its treatment, and I'm excited to see where that goes. Lewy body is the next most common dementia, but that's down at a good 9 to 10% of cases. It's probably the most distinctive in how it presents itself. It's caused by buildup of things called Lewy bodies in the brain, and a person with Lewy body may be more prone to hallucination earlier on, more prone to changes in mobility, balance, and orientation, and some mood swings. But as you'll see, that can be the case with any of these as well. Vascular dementia is essentially a series of strokes. That's what my grandfather had. Some of them can be more major strokes. Some of them can be TIAs, or strokes so small that after they've happened, it's hard to prove that they happened medically, right? It won't show up on imaging. So it tends to have a more choppy decline, right? Instead of a slow decline, it'll be in more steps with long plateaus. But again, there's a lot of overlap there, right? Frontotemporal primarily affects the frontal and temporal lobes first. A person with that dementia might have trouble with social graces, behaving appropriately in conversation, might have some mood issues as well, but their speech tends to be a little bit later affected, as well as their mobility. But again, that can vary, right? Alcohol dementia is what it says in the name. It can be caused by alcohol consumption. It is reversible until it's not. And then there are other things that can cause it, like a vitamin deficiency, which is reversible until it's not. So there's a bunch of lesser causes, right? As we're talking today, we're talking about the dementias that are united in that they are progressive, they get worse over time, they are irreversible, permanent, and they are, if you get to the end of the disease process, they are fatal. Now, this all sounds extremely gloomy right off the bat, doesn't it? It's very easy to get hopeless talking about these kinds of things. But I will tell you that in my day-to-day experience, life with dementia is not abject misery. One of the great mercies of dementia is that one of the first things people who have it forget is that they have dementia. So to them, they may occasionally feel that something is off, something is wrong, and that might give them anxiety and fear. But by and large, to them, they are living their day-to-day, right? So that's a good place to start out from. Now, knowing what dementia is, this gives us a chance to talk about the people behind the dementia. Now, the reason why there's so much crossover between how these diseases present themselves, to the point that a lot of these dementias cannot be confirmed without an autopsy, right, is because all of our brains are different. Every single person in this room is a different person, and our brains reflect that. The brain is the organ in the body that is the most different from person to person. And with the disease affecting a different brain in every individual person, it's going to present itself completely differently from person to person. So no two dementias are the same, which presents a lot of unknowns, right? Which is why it's so important to look at it from the perspective of who is the person that the disease has, right? So let's talk about the stages. And again, there are different ways to look at this. When you're talking about Alzheimer's, people talk about the 12 stages, right? Or 10 stages, or whatever they're at right now. There's also and that tends to be more clinical. There's also the GEM stages, which look a lot more at personality type and how they function. We're going to talk in the most basic terms that apply to all of them. We're going to talk about early, middle, and late stage, and also preclinical and end, but mostly early, middle, and late. Now, when I say preclinical, most people have dementia for a number of years before it becomes apparent, right? There are different reasons for that. A person might, as we get older, things about our brains change. We have less what's called fluid intelligence, meaning it's harder to learn new things, pick up new things, learn how to use a new iPhone, whatever. I'm noticing some chuckles of recognition here, right? Pick up a new language, those things become harder, but you have more crystallized intelligence, which is to say that library of knowledge you've accumulated throughout your life is much broader than, say, a person my age, right? So that difference can alter how a person interacts with their world. They might, need more time. You might need someone to, your grandkids need to slow down a little bit while they're talking, right? Might need to be reminded of things sometimes. So in the very early stages of dementia, the preclinical stages, it can be really hard to spot the difference between normal aging changes to the brain and dementia. Usually people reach a tipping point where someone's really not retaining information, or someone who always got dressed very nicely for the day is in their PJs all the time now, or gets really confused about something, or climbs up on their roof to deal with the gutters themselves at 90, that's when she turned out okay, she was fine. But, there comes a tipping point where either the person themselves or the people closest to them start to notice that something is different. So now we talk about early stage. And here we're going to start seeing things being very well, it depends again, right? It depends on the person. But often in the early stages, the first things that will go are short-term memory. right? It'll be harder to remember things. It will not be impossible to remember new things. For instance, the residents where I live know how to do the hokey pokey with jazz hands. They did not come in knowing how to do the hokey pokey with jazz hands. That is our fault that they know how to do that. So they can clearly learn new things, right? It just takes a little more repetition. They may get more confused easily in conversation. They might forget what they're doing. They might lose some names or some words. There's something called aphasia, if anyone's ever heard that term before. Yes, so in aphasia, a person will struggle with language. It starts out, say, expressive aphasia. A person might have trouble finding a certain word. They want to say something, but they can't find the right, what is it, right? Or they might use the wrong word in that spot. I'm looking for my park instead of I'm looking for my purse. Or they may get part way into a sentence. You tend to see that a little later on, where they'll get kind of stuck in the sentence, right? Those are all examples of expressive aphasia, and it can be very frustrating for the person who has it, who knows what they want to say, but they just can't find those words. It can be harder to spot aphasia in their listening, right? What are they understanding of what you're saying? And we'll get into that later. But those are some of the things you start to see in the early stages. Moving on to, and they may also have trouble with more complicated tasks like handling their own finances, right? Or finding their way from point A to point B. Or cooking. In my grandfather's case, he was able to drive for a very long time. His sense of direction remained better than my grandmother's, actually. But he wasn't able to cook anymore, which was something he was really good at. He just couldn't get that task to work in his head, and it translated to action. So moving into middle stage, you'll generally see those things progress a little bit more. A person may have much more difficulty with language, may have difficulty with their day-to-day tasks. What order do I put my clothes on in? And we'll get into that as well. They may have trouble with memories further back or recognizing familiar faces, figuring out where they are in place and time. And we'll get into that as well. More trouble with mobility and balance. They're more likely to trip, more likely to have trouble signing their name, for example, or writing a letter, and oftentimes more aphasia. Now, as we get into the late stages, a person is going to need significantly more help. They may need help with more basic tasks of living, ADLs as we call them, activities of daily living, such as using the bathroom or eating. They may have significantly hampered mobility and much more difficulty speaking. In the late stages, or not in the end stages, a person will see alterations to the most basic parts of the brain, things that control swallowing, breathing, temperature regulation, and that's when a person enters the dying process. However, it is possible to have a good quality of life through all of that. And the biggest component in that is the people that are closest to us. So if the people who are closest to us know how to handle the person with dementia, right? That can change their whole worldview, because the world is then tailored to what they need. It's important to anticipate what the person with dementia will need. Dementia is always number one when it comes to a person's medical needs. If they're going to a family event, right? That dementia has to come first. So how do you work with a person who has dementia, or rather, how do you partner with them, right? We don't want to just be caregivers. We want to be care partners, because they are also doing the best they can to care for themselves day to day and the people around them. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the positive physical approach. Now, what that is it's a way of communicating with people who have dementia that brings it to their level, right? It's on an even playing field. So a person with dementia, especially starting in the middle stages, will start to see the world differently. And I mean literally see the world differently. They will have vision changes, which may be compounded by age-related vision changes like cataracts or glaucoma, right? but they will start to have a narrowing of the field of view. So I can see my hand just fine right here. They may not. So if you approach them from the side or from the back, you very easily could startle them. They will also start to see best in the middle distance. So say some of my residents are in the living room and the TV's on and they're all looking in different directions. That's because that TV is too far away for them to really register. Or say a group of my residents are sitting around the dinner table and someone's eating off of their neighbor's plate instead of their own. Well, it's not that they want their neighbor to starve or be unhappy, and they've got the same food. They can see that. Well, they can't because they have their plate too close. They're not perceiving it really. But that plate is right where they see it best. They might also have depth perception changes. So if I had dementia in the middle stages, I might be reaching out for that chair arm right there and not understanding why I can't grab that. Or they might start seeing color as depth. So this podium right here has kind of a wood grain pattern, right? I might be trying to pick up the wood grain right there. You'll also see sometimes people will be nervous to change between flooring types if they're walking. You'll see this in someone who holds their hands a little out in front of them because they're very aware that they're having trouble with their mobility and balance. They're aware of that. But they might get to where this would change to wood, say, and stop, because that looks like a change in depth. That looks like they could trip or fall into a hole, right? So those are already some visual changes. Auditory changes. In addition to age-related ones like hearing loss, a person may need more time to process, especially if they have aphasia. They may need different clarification words or other cues to figure out what is being said to them. So with all of this taken into account, how do you work with a person who has dementia? How do you partner with them? So this is where the positive physical approach comes in. I'm going to take this with me and really just hope that I don't make an awful sound or anything like that. So where am I going to be off camera? Am I going to be okay coming? Yeah. Okay, that's great. I'm also going to steal a chair up here. So I could use a volunteer, or I could go pretending there's someone in this chair. Is there anyone who would like to be a volunteer? All right, come on up. Okay, so you are going to be a person with dementia. Now, the first step of the positive physical approach is you want to make sure that you are coming from the front or as close to the front as possible. If you have dementia and you're looking that way and I come up to you like this or like this, I could really scare you. If I start pushing your wheelchair out of nowhere, if you're in a wheelchair, who is this? Where are they taking me? You might slam down the brakes, you might yell, right? I mean, you shouldn't just take the wheelchair of anyone in a wheelchair to begin with, right? But that's not any less so because the person has dementia, right? So I want to make sure I'm coming from the front, right? And then I want to make sure I'm going slow as I approach. Now, the reasons for this are twofold. If you're like me and you've got something to do, you're dashing around getting as many things done as possible, right? But when you come up to someone, you don't want them to think you're going to barrel them over. But also, the entire time you're approaching that person, they are trying to gauge what you want. They may not recognize you at first. So if I look like I'm in a bad mood, right? I'm impatient looking, I'm looking upset, like I'm on my last straw, no matter what kind of a day it is, I don't want to do that because they're looking at me and they're going, am I in trouble? Is it something I did? And they're already going to be on guard that way, right? But if I'm relaxed and I have a smile, they're like, oh, who's this nice person? Do I know them? They seem nice. I wonder what they want, right? So give them that time to process and make sure your face matches. You come from the front and you go slow. Okay, I've approached you now. This is really uncomfortable, isn't it? This isn't fun. No, I'm boxing you in. You're doing a better job maintaining eye contact than most people, so good job. But this is super uncomfortable, right? So the first thing I want to do is I want to get to the side because that will make them uncomfortable too. I want to get to the side, and if they're sitting down, I want to get down to their level, right? So this is a little better, isn't it? Yeah, this is a lot better. So then you offer your hand. You don't have to take my hand if you don't want to, but you offer your hand. Hi, how are you? What's your name?
Dale.
Dale. Hi, Dale. How are you today? You've got dementia? That kind of a day then, huh? I'm Britta. It's nice to meet you. So Now, in the later stages, that hand contact is really important because where other senses may be failing, human touch which is a body language, becomes extremely important, right? Because we communicate our meanings through touch. You want to know where a person's boundaries are, right? But using respectful touch like that can help a person understand your motives, establish your contact, and get you off to the right start, right? In the late stages, that becomes even more important, and we'll get to that. But yes, so thank you so much. So I'm going to actually keep you here for just a minute, right? Actually, no, I'm gonna go through this one more time for everybody, and then I'm gonna let you go back to your spot. You've been a really great sport. Thank you. All right, so just to review, you want to come from the front. You want to go slow. You want to get to the side. If they're sitting down, you want to get low, right? Offer your hand. Use the preferred name. Hi, Dale. How you doing? And then you can get into whatever it is that you have to talk about or do, right? Thank you so much. You can go back to your spot.
We moved here in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife and
Oh, there you go.
2017.
Mm-hmm.
My wife was diagnosed with dementia.
Oh, yes.
Okay, and we were out in Nebraska I had a big corner lot, tri-level house.
Oh, yeah.
And just Sue and me, and we got to the point that she was putting knives in the oven and
oh, yep,
things like that. And Sarah, who lives here in Wisconsin, met in Middleton. She said, "Dad, you got to move."
Mm-hmm.
We came here then, July 1st, 2017, and Sue passed away with dementia with Lewy bodies.
Lewy body.
Dementia, which is her elbows are 90-degree angles, her legs were 90-degree angles. And,
yeah.
It was just right now it's great because she's up in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
She died April 22nd, August 2nd, 2022.
Well, I'm sorry to hear for your loss, but
I also have dementia, and they've been doing tests on me, and I've been running through all kinds of stuff. So I'm going down the same.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. All right. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we get into, okay, so once you're there, let's talk about how to communicate with a person beyond that. So people with dementia are adults, right? They're grown people. That's the first thing to remember. We want to avoid something called elder speak, right? That sounds a little bit like this, you know? And I think probably we've all heard it before, calling someone honey, baby, sweetie, saying, let's get our shoes on, right? Well, unless you're also putting your own shoes on, that doesn't even make sense, right? But you want to talk to a person like they're an adult because they are. They have not ceased to be an adult. And even if there's behavior changes, personality changes, memory changes, they are still them, right? We need to treat them like they're still there because they are. Okay? So talk to them like an adult. If you need to slow it down a little, but not crazy. Make sure you're enunciating. That'll help. And if the person is having trouble understanding you, try to keep it really simple. Let me give you an example of a way we don't want to talk to a person with dementia. So it looks like it's going to rain outside today. I mean, the weatherman said it's going to rain, but there's sometimes wrong. But we should do something inside. What do you want to do? Did any of you catch that? If you did, I'm kind of impressed. You don't have to have dementia to have trouble understanding that. A better way to say that would be, it's going to rain today. We should do something inside. Would you like to do a puzzle or watch TV? Right? So a few things I did. Shorter sentences, clear about what I'm saying. I got rid of the extra information that no one needs to know. And then I offered what's called limited choice. So limited choice is to the question, what do you want to do? What a diner menu is to the Cheesecake Factory menu, right? The Cheesecake Factory menu is a whole book. And if you've never been there before, the waiter's going to have to come back a few times, right? What do you want to do? What, out of the whole, like all of the things one could possibly do, right? Ever been put on the spot and then not been able to think of anything? Yeah, so offer a couple options. They don't like any of those. Try a couple different options, right? Notice how you're letting them be in charge, letting them have their agency, right? And they should be able to expect to have that agency, but at the same time, you are helping them to do that. We should be partnering, helping them to be able to be as in control of their destinies as possible, and just giving them the tools to do so and the support they need, right? Okay, so let's talk about the 6 dimensions of well-being, right? So what is this life that we want people to be able to lead, or what is the life that we want to be able to lead? I've got handouts with this for after if anyone's interested, but for now, they are the physical dimension, emotional, purposeful, spiritual, social, and intellectual. So these are just things that people with dementia need. These are things all of us need, and a person with dementia might just need a little additional help on. Physical is things like hygiene, nutrition, hydration, good sleep, mobility, maybe their medications, the ability to be free of injury or sickness. Those are all in a roof over your head, correct temperature. Those are all physical needs, right? They're what we tend to think of as what a caregiver does when someone might need help. However, with the other dimensions, we get into more where dementia is very particular. Emotional well-being, right? A person with dementia or a person who's just getting older in general deals with a lot of losses, right? Loss of loved ones who may have gone before you, loss of independence, loss of a home, loss of livelihood, maybe loss of a sense of purpose, loss of an ability to do favorite hobbies, loss of health or mobility. All of those are losses people grapple with as they get older. And that's true for people with dementia too. With people who have dementia, they may also be grappling with loss of memory. Maybe that loss of independence really hits extra hard. And so all of those losses mean a person has emotional needs. We all grapple with our emotional needs differently, but that's a time when it's important to know you have someone that you can rely on, right? That you have each other. So making sure, if you are the person who has dementia in this equation, that you have your network of people that you trust the most. You have them in place and they will support you. If you are the loved one of a person with dementia, making sure you are there, making sure you are observant. Are they becoming more withdrawn? Are they seeming much more anxious? They need to check something over and over and over again. You may find that there's something in particular that's bothering them, a change in routine, a new loss, something they're not sure about. Maybe there's a chemical imbalance in the brain, as can happen when you have a brain neurodegenerative disease, and maybe medication is necessary. You always want to see if there's a behavioral or atmosphere or environmental approach that you can take first before a medication approach, but sometimes we all need that kind of medication for our well-being, right? There are conditions under which we would need it. So that's the emotional dimension. So let's talk purposeful. Everyone needs a reason to get up in the morning, right? That does not change when you have dementia, right? We all need to feel needed. We all need to feel like we have something we're doing here, right? For me, the thing that gets me up in the morning is, well, first to feed the dog and then to go to work and help my 32 friends there. I had my grandfather, when he was in memory care, and we're getting a little into validation therapy here, but the entire time he was there, he thought he was at a booksellers convention. This is called a delusion. Does anyone know the difference between a delusion and a hallucination? Yes? You want to tell us, or should I say it? Okay. Okay, please do. So my mom's clapping for that. So the hallucination, most simply put, is sensory. You see, hear, smell, taste, have a sense of touch of something that isn't there. A delusion is believing something that's demonstrably not true. or an aspect. So hallucinations are part and parcel with some kinds of dementia, but it's always good to notice whether hallucinations are picking up or are new, because that may mean that someone has something else going on, like maybe a urinary tract infection, right? Which can have, I don't know why those can have psychological results, especially in older adults, but that can happen. Up to and including major personality changes or utter confusion. So watch out for those major changes. But a delusion, some of them are very negative, such as paranoid delusions, which is, I think, what most of us are familiar with when we think of delusions. But they can also just be how someone makes sense of their world. And delusions are completely normal as a coping mechanism for a person who has dementia. So here we get to my grandfather. My grandfather thought he was at a booksellers convention while he was living at the memory care. And from his perspective, it made sense. Remember, one of the first things he forgot is that he had dementia. So we had to come up with a reason, why am I in this place, right? Well, we've got these long hallways with rooms off to the sides with ensuite bathrooms. So clearly this is a hotel. And we get together in these big rooms for fancy meals and for talks. Obviously, this is a convention. And since my grandfather, for most of his career, was a university bookstore manager at Washington University, at KU, at St. Olaf, obviously we're at a booksellers convention. Makes sense, right? Now, interestingly, he knew who I was for a lot of that. He was retired before I started, or before I was, God, listen to me, before I was alive, but he still knew who I was. But when he stopped remembering who I was, he thought, I think to himself, wow, this young lady really is interested in knowing if I need anything. Does she work for me? She must work for me. I bet she's one of the college students working at the bookstore. And he'd tell me, go tell Greg down at shipping, blah, 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 blah. Greg was his shipping manager. And at first, not having the training I do now, I would say, no, it's me, Grandpa, your granddaughter, Britta, remember? And he would get very disconcerted because just telling him to remember would not bring it back. And where first he knew, oh, I know what I'm doing here. I am working at the booksellers convention. Now he would get very disconcerted. I don't have a granddaughter. I think I would know if I had a granddaughter. Does my wife know anything about this? Where's my wife? Where's my daughters? I need to go home. I need to go home. Oh my God, I need to go home. Where am I? Right? So in doing so, I shattered his worldview. So what I learned to do was he would say, go tell Greg down at the shipping, blah, 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 blah. And I would say right away, Mr. Scheffel, and off I'd go. Because it was more important that he be secure in himself and his surroundings and in his purpose than it was for me to have the emotional security of him knowing who I was. And I got to know a different side of him that way too. So that is an example of a benign delusion. And what I did there is called validation therapy, which is essentially this. A person with dementia cannot always join us in the present as we know it. So it is often most expedient and most humane to join them where they are. Because at some point, the objective truth doesn't matter so much as the emotional and personal truth behind it. That's hard. It is very hard. It involves a big change in one's thinking because we're taught you don't lie to the people you love, right? But I'll give you another example. Oftentimes I'll have one of my residents come up to me and say, I'm looking for my mom. Have you seen her? Have you seen my mother? Now, oftentimes the worst thing I could say is, your mom died 20 years ago, because they don't remember that. Saying it won't make them go, oh yeah. They may not believe me, or they may feel it like they just found out their mom died. And then they're going to grieve. And then they're going to forget. And then they're going to ask me, have you seen my mother? Right? So in that respect, telling the truth in an objective sense is not as important as catering to the personal truth, the world they live in, right? So that's one example of purpose, but there's a lot of other. Did that answer the question at all? I don't know if it was a question, but as we're talking about purpose, we can also be talking about people's broader purpose in life. We had a lady who took care of 4 generations of her family. She took care of her parents. She took care of her sister when her sister got sick, took care of her own kids, and raised one of her granddaughters. Yeah, by the time she was living with us, she had great-grandchildren, and they were the light of her life. Anyone here ever heard of the movie Frozen? Yeah, well, she had a necklace that had characters from Frozen that she wore every day that was made for her by one of her great-grandkids. And whenever she got her nails painted, one of her great-grandkids would make sure that her nails matched. So it was very important for her to be deeply tied to her family. She was with us when we locked down for the pandemic, and you could see her withdraw inside herself. This also coincided with her hearing aids not working anymore. And you could see the fear and uncertainty written plainly on her face. The most important thing we could do was to find some way, no matter what, to keep her in touch with her family. So we started doing window visits. Her family that were nearby would come and stand at her window, and we would give her a phone to hold up to her ear, and they would talk through the window. Or we would do video calls. And no matter how many explanations it took that, no, this isn't just a video, you can really talk to them. It made the difference. We also got her hearing aids repaired. And she started smiling again. And she kept on having that better quality of life right up until the day she peacefully died. So in that case, family was the most important thing. For some people, it's career. I had a resident who was a reporter and a professor, and he served in World War II. And for him, his life's work was the most important thing in his life. The best thing we could do for him was ask him about it. Let him tell his stories, right? And if he was really into it, he would think we were his journalism students. For him, that was giving him his quality of life, his purpose, and his identity back, right? For some people, it's serving others, right? I see this the most in teachers and nurses, but I see it in people of every walk of life, that their purpose, their sense of purpose comes in being of service to others. And it is important to let people who have dementia, who still fully have the capacity, by the way, to be servants to others, to do that, right? I have a lady who is a nurse of 50 years. She'll tell you there's no such thing as a former nurse. And while we can't let her actually nurse the other residents, of course, she can do a lot. If somebody is on the ground, she will be the first person to tell us, right? Or, you know, sometimes we have a friend of hers who we sit across the dining room table from her because she will not let that person get up and leave while forgetting their walker, right? And every Thursday, she calls bingo. So she is getting agency in her living situation. She is getting to be of use to others, feel competent, because she is of use to others and is competent, right? Basically, if you need help with something and a person with dementia can help, or if you don't need help, but they can make it a little easier for you, I'm perfectly capable of carrying all of these things on my own, but I can hand you a couple and we'll go together. Do that, right? Because a person with dementia isn't looking to have everything done for them. They still want to be a person just like the rest of us, and we should let them. In this, you know, we may be thinking, well, what if they can't do it anymore? What if they can't do that thing? Well, then you move the goalposts, right? So as an example, if a person can't get themselves all the way dressed by themselves, just do what they need done and you just do the rest. Can they tie their own shoes? Let them tie their own shoes. If they can't tie the shoe, but they can put the shoe on, have them put the shoe on, right? If for the same purpose, if they have some mobility issues, but there's something they love to do, like go bowling, right? We set up a little bowling alley in our community. It's great because the metal fire doors behind where we bowl make a really loud sound when the pins hit it. It's like a real bowling alley. It's great. And boy, can they hit those pins, right? But if somebody is unsteady, hold them at the hip and shoulder and let them bowl, right? Just move the goalposts where they need, offer assistance, whether it's with knowing what to do with the task or with the physical functions of the task, and let them do the rest, right? Because it's not about what they can't do. It's about what they can do and what we can do to make it happen, right? Because they are still very capable. Now, going back to validation, and also behavior. Sometimes people with, this is going to be a sharp turn, sorry, but sometimes people with dementia will act out, but they're not acting out to act out, right? They're grown adults, not little kids having a tantrum. When a person with dementia exhibits stressed out, aggravated behavior, it's because something is wrong. They don't have the words to tell you what's wrong. And so they're telling you in the only way they know how, right? So the thing to do is not to get frustrated, even though that can be hard sometimes, it's to get curious. I'll give you an example. Say someone where I work is wandering around, trying all the doors, setting off door alarms and stuff, right? Going into other people's rooms. Well, they're not trying to be a nuisance. Something's up. Maybe they're feeling lost, trying to find the way out. Maybe something spooked them. Maybe, something unnerved them and they're, trying to get out into safety. Maybe they really need a bathroom, right? Maybe they really need a bathroom. So take that time to help them, figure out what it is they need and help them get that. And if that thing is security, offer that. Walk with them a bit, talk with them a bit. Sometimes we all just need someone to understand and feel like we have an ally, right? If someone's in the living room and they whip off their shirt, they're not trying to be inappropriate. Maybe it's really hot in that room and they forgot that they're not home alone, right? So the thing to do is not to scold, it's to help them get that shirt back on, maybe bring them back to where they can change into something a little lighter, right? So what might strike us as inappropriate or aggressive or challenging behavior is just them trying to figure out how to do what they feel needs to be done. It may also be pain. It might be a UTI, right? If they're sick or in pain, that could definitely be a cause for some aggravation. And if they don't know how to tell you that or can't figure out that they can't identify that feeling, then yeah, they're going to show you in the only way they know how, whether they're doing it consciously or unconsciously. We had a lady who broke her leg. She had a hip replacement, a knee replacement. She broke the one thing that was left to break, right? Didn't expect her to be walking again, but she started walking again. She shouldn't have been, but she didn't remember that. And she would be walking along and she'd be walking like this and she'd go, oh, owie. And I'd say, are you in pain? And she'd say, oh, no, honey, I'm fine. Well, there are two things that could be. Sometimes they just don't want to bother you, right? But in her case, she really didn't know that feeling was pain, even though she said, ow, that wasn't connecting, right? So you've got to be observant and figure out, maybe, are they walking funny? Are there any marks? Do I need to take them to a doctor and get this checked out, right? Can you spot for that? You take the other clues if they can't tell you. They may also not be able to localize it. They can tell you they're in pain, but not where. Guy was complaining of leg pain, turned out he had a broken rib. So you got to work with them to figure out what it is, because sometimes they just don't know, right? And they want to put their finger on what the problem is as much as you do, right? So let's move into late stage. All right. So actually, no, how are we on time? 10 minutes? Okay. I've got enough. Yeah, let's move into late stage. And then I can answer any questions you guys have. So in the late stages, a person will see their mobility significantly decreased. Those sensory changes will be much more pronounced and they may be nonverbal. That may also happen earlier, or mostly nonverbal. Sometimes something will click and they'll say something. I had a lady who was nonverbal. By and large, one day she got out of her wheelchair and was walking. I helped her get settled on the couch by the fireplace, handed her a magazine I knew she liked, and she said, bring me some wine, right? So there's another example of they are absolutely still in there, right? It's just sometimes things click where they can bring it out and show you, and sometimes they don't. So that is an example of in the late stages, we need to treat them like they are still there because they are. You should still talk to a person like they are still there until the moment their heart stops beating, right? Because until that moment, they are still there. And even in a coma, it's been shown that people can still hear. So in the late stages, you will have to adapt even further how you are communicating with that person. Body language becomes very important, holding their hand, right? Rubbing their back or their shoulder, just being in their space where they can see you and where they can hear you and feel you, right? Going slow. All throughout the process, music is important. Music is very important. Music and spirituality, if they are religious, but here it becomes especially important. A person who is nonverbal may still know how to sing all the lyrics to a song they knew as a kid. I see that every single day, right? Music just connects to our brains in a certain way, dancing too. So keep singing with them, keep praying with them, because those things will still land. And every once in a while, you might notice them responding, right? Sometimes you've got to meet very specific conditions for that to work, and you may not know what they are, but they are in there and they are hearing you. And they may understand you, they may not. And if they don't understand you, they can still hear your voice, hear that you are calm and intimate and with them. You are present, right? And they will know that they are not alone, even if they don't know who you are. There's a lady I work with whose husband told me this story, that when she was still living at home, she said to him one day, "I don't know who you are, but I know you're here to help." They may not know who you are or how they know you, but a person with dementia will always remember how you make them feel. That doesn't go away. Of my 32 friends that I work with, I think about 4 of them know my name. And one of them almost knows my name, right? Some of them just guess. They've called me Cynthia, Nikki, Sharon, Robert, any number of names I've had over the years, but they all know who I am to them, right? They know how I make them feel. And what I try to do, what I want to be someone who makes them feel safe and loved and heard. That, I think, is the most important thing, is for a person with dementia to not be treated like they're not present. In the late stages, a person may be in, has anyone seen those big Broda wheelchairs? They may not be able to move much. They may have contractures, which is what you mentioned, the muscles, when the part of the brain that controls those muscles goes away, it leaves the lights on, essentially. All of those muscles stay tense. And you don't want to pull on those muscles because that's just going to hurt them. But they may be very much quiet and alone in their wheelchair, and they may feel like they truly are all alone. And if we treat them like a piece of furniture, yeah, they're going to be all alone. That should not happen to anybody. Keep talking to them like they're right there. Be there in that space with them, because whether you see that flicker of recognition or not, they are. And it's very likely that if you do that, you will see that spark. In my grandfather's last month of life or so, well, I should give you a little background. There was something he would say. He was a real funny guy, right? Real silly. When we were kids, he would put on different personas to make us do things we didn't want to do. When it was haircut time, he would be Oli, the Norwegian barber. When it was time to eat one's vegetables, he would be Pierre, the dietitian. I think Oli was also the chef, and for me, it was Pierre, the beautician. For my brother, it was Oli, the Norwegian barber. But the point is, he had all these different voices and characters he put on, and he retained that sense of humor and just being wonderful with children all the way to the end of his life. And there was a little thing he'd say. I'd say, "How are you doing?" And he'd say, "Well, I was better, but I got over it." Right? Yeah. So hokey and so perfect. But some point in his disease progression, he stopped saying it. And then I think it was in his last month of life, where he was pretty disconnected from the outside world. He had a lot of hallucinations going on with his vascular dementia. But I said to him, "Hey, Paul, how are you today?" And he said, "Well, I was better, but I got over it." It clicked, right? He had this thing he would do where he thought this was hilarious, and I did too. He would sing the Meow Mix theme to our dog. Meow, 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 meow. He was doing that the day before he died. It was still in there, right? And his favorite hymn was Beautiful Savior, as sung by the St. Olaf Choir. And we had that on the radio in his room when he was going. And the day before he passed, that played on the CD player, and he sat up and he clapped. And there you go. Keep bringing them what they love. Keep bringing them your presence and showing them your presence and your love right until they've gone to heaven, right? I think that's the most important thing you can give a person with dementia, or anyone in general, is your presence. And I think you'll find that they give it right back. Do we have time for a couple questions? Thank you. All right. Okay. Oh, there we go.
One of my friends cared for her husband who had dementia, and she read the book by Marty Schreiber, the former lieutenant governor, about his wife. And I think it was called My Two Elaines.
Yes.
Yeah. And she said in reading things, people often talked about there being two Elaines. And she never felt that with her husband. She always felt she saw Jim's essence until the day he died. She didn't, he didn't always recognize her, but she felt his essence, didn't feel there was two of him.
Right.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. She just mentioned
I do.
the other day.
Yes. So I think there's two aspects to that. People with dementia can seem very different from who they were before, right? And a lot of that is reactions under fear and stress and the unknown. We all act differently when we're afraid, right? I think some of it comes down to outlook, right? What we are able to see in each other, which does not make a person better or worse, by the way. Some of us are good at music. Some of us are good at math. Some of us have an easier time adapting to the changing interactions with dementia than others. Doesn't make anyone good or bad or love anyone less or more. It's just different. There's also the fact that, if it's her husband, then this distinction doesn't apply, but I want to bring this up because I think it's very important for everyone to know, is no one knows the caregiver experience like the primary caregiver. If somebody is that 24/7 care partner, maybe to a spouse, maybe to a parent, whatever that relationship is, they know that person and the challenges more than anyone else does. Sometimes more distant loved ones will come out of left field to have opinions. No one knows like the primary caregiver, right? And the spouse's experience is oftentimes the most difficult because for kids and for grandkids, although my grandfather was kind of a father figure to me as well, but for people's children, you grow out of your parents and you become the caretaker. It's hard, but it's, it's, as long as humanity's been around, that's been the evolution we go through. Doesn't make it easy, but that's the progression. For a spouse, that's your life partner, and you still rely on them as much as they rely on you. And that can be really, really difficult in and of itself. And you're looking for that person that you have relied on for so long. That has been half of you, right? So I guess my answer there is that it all depends on the person with dementia, how they present in their individuality, in the person that the disease has, not the disease the person has. And it also depends on the loved one looking at them, Everyone's experience is different. I know it was an extremely difficult journey for my grandmother. Extremely difficult seeing my grandfather change. She was the primary caregiver. She's got a different personality than me. Doesn't mean she loved him any less or more, was better or worse at loving. Just means we're different people, and had a different relationship with him. And it doesn't mean that he was a different person, but she felt a difference in their relationship.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Absolutely.
I want to come at you with a different approach.
Yes.
I don't know how many people really know and understand that individuals who have schizophrenia, which we recognize as one of the most serious and persistent mental illnesses of the brain, that people with schizophrenia are more apt to, as they age, develop Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious as to what the data is out there in terms of people who are in memory care, who had and have schizophrenia, who now have Alzheimer's and or some other major dementia, but particularly Alzheimer's. Because I think it's big. People are living longer.
Mm-hmm.
People with schizophrenia, their average length of living is 52 years in this country, but it is extending when people have decent care of their mental illness. So what can you speak to about that?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have numbers for you, but I can tell you a few truths about this. So first of all, there are absolutely people who have a major mental illness and dementia, which could fall under that category too. It's a disease in the brain. I think part of the hesitancy to use that term is because there is so much undeserved stigma around it, as if that's something a person can help, right? Around mental illness. I'm sorry. Yes, around mental illness, that there's so much stigma. So I think maybe that's part of why people don't put dementia in that category. I think it takes, no. I'm sorry. I'm getting there. But my point here, if I can get to it, is that there are people in those care settings, and there are also people being cared for at home. And it's hard to judge the overall population by who is in a facility care setting, who has these conditions and who is living with them together. I think there's a tendency for people with major mental illness and dementia to end up in somewhat different care settings depending on the person. Yep, because there's memory care, but there's different degrees of memory care as well. There are much smaller facilities that are aimed to give people much more one-on-one care, and there are larger facilities as well. So I'm sorry, am I still not answering the question? The differential between.
What are you saying that people who have a mental illness who then end up with a dementia or Alzheimer's, which is one of the dementias,
Mm-hmm.
that those individuals might be placed in a different kind of care setting?
No, they would still be sharing those care settings with anyone else who has dementia, but there may be different avenues that are appropriate. There are different sizes of care settings, right? And different arrangements for how much attention a person might get, how much staff attention. Is it more independent? Is it more direct supervision? Is there a lot more assistance? What's the level of training? So, and again, it all depends on the person as well. Each case is different. So just like anyone else with dementia, finding that appropriate level of care for the person. I think people who have both of those things are tend to need a little bit more one-on-one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just want to know about your friend there that you wrote. Yeah, do you want to talk about your props?
Yes, I actually completely forgot I had those. Okay, so these, oh, I forgot I had this too. So these here are various tools that may be used for engagement of people in middle to late stage dementia, sometimes in early stage if they provide comfort. And by the way, none of these are toys meant for small children. All of these are specifically designed for adults with dementia. This is a robotic cat, and I think this is, yeah, I grabbed the malfunctioning one, unfortunately, but I can tell you what it's supposed to do. It meows, it purrs, it raises up its paw and licks it. And the idea is that animals, which provide so much comfort to a lot of people who have dementia, that even if they aren't able to have one with them, they kind of can have one with them. There's a mix of people who will think this is a real cat and people who will know it's not, but also will still feel that comfort. We have a cat in our facility that we know malfunctions. Its name is Cloudy. We had a lady who missed her kitty named Sky. And so she got one that looked like her cat and named it Cloudy. And she said, I know he's not real, but he's such a good friend. And we still have Cloudy because she made me promise to take care of him. But these can provide great comfort, and that purring, which science has shown is actually very good for people's stress levels and even promotes healing. These things can simulate that too. So good. I am so happy to hear you do. There's a similar tool that I don't have here because every one of them was in use this morning. But there are baby dolls that are actually meant for adults with dementia too. They are not the same ones as you get for small children, and don't worry, they're not robots like that cat is. But they are designed to have about the size and weight of a human infant. And having that, holding a baby, I think it would raise my stress levels, but it can cause people's brains to release oxytocin, serotonin, right? And soothe them. I know my grandfather in his last months of life, he carried around one of the babies and sang to it, held it perfectly just right, just like a real baby. His number one dad, but it provided him a lot of comfort as well. And again, you'll get a mix of people who think it's a real baby and know it's not, but still derive that comfort from holding a child. Exposure to children, if possible. Again, everybody's different. Some people just don't like kids, but can be a really good thing for both. One, because kids can learn to be acceptant and unafraid of people with dementia. And two, because that, engaging with children can be really meaningful to people who have dementia. Even some people who don't like pets or kids, when they get dementia, they find they engage more. Now, that doesn't go for everybody, but it can be true. So allowing them to have those experiences is important. The last two things I brought are sensory items. These look familiar to anybody? Yeah, okay. So I'm sorry. So, this is going to end in a big crash, isn't it? So these first ones are called fidget quilts or busy quilts, right? They've got all kinds of things to mess with, ties, buttons, different textures. And they're a good way to occupy a person's hands, right? Give them something to do, that stimulation, while they're sitting and doing something else, or have downtime, or just need some comfort. It's something to, I'm actually going after it right now. And then the bigger ones can also provide some warmth and weighted comfort, right? This one, I don't know why this is on here. Hang on. It seems like someone might have been modifying this for themselves. This one is called a busy board. It's got latches and straps and all kinds of things to fiddle with. Good for the tinkering minded. Something I've noticed, especially with a lot of our guys, I know my grandfather did this, is the tendency to take apart their walkers. So this is something else to do. I strongly recommend, if you have a loved one who has dementia, or if you have dementia and you have a walker, get really good at putting that thing back together. Because you may need to. But this is an alternative to taking apart the walker as well. Tools that are non-dangerous are also good. You don't want to be giving them like a Fisher-Price, baby's first plastic power drill, right? Because again, they're adults, right? But having those things to perform those familiar tasks can be soothing, can be engaging, and also keeps those parts of the brain alive. And if ever heard the term use it or lose it, if you take Spanish for one semester in middle school and then never again, by the time you reach adulthood, you're going to know how to count to 10 and say hello and goodbye, right? When you have dementia, that goes for absolutely everything. So it's important to be talking about those old memories, singing those old songs, doing tasks, motor tasks, favorite hobbies, whatever, to keep those neural pathways going, because the pathways that we use are going to be the pathways that we retain for longest, right? And a person who has dementia, who is engaged, who is busy every day, is going to live longer and in a better condition than someone who does not. That is why I have a full-time job and not a part-time job.
Britta,
Is-
thank you for sharing with us. This has been great.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you all very much. I have, if anyone's interested in the dimensions of well-being, I've got that here. So, because I know I went through those pretty fast.